In the year 2000, BMW was bleeding money. Their flagship inline-six was outdated, their reputation was slipping, and Mercedes was eating their lunch. Then they built the M54. This single engine didn't just save the company, it created a generation of wealthy car enthusiasts. Here's how. Let's go back to 1999. BMW had a problem. Their legendary M52 engine, the inline-six that powered the E39 5 Series and E46 3 Series, was starting to show its age. But more importantly, it had a fatal flaw: the VANOS system, BMW's variable valve timing technology. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it was a maintenance nightmare. Seals would fail, oil lines would crack, and when it went wrong, it didn't just cost money, it destroyed BMW's reputation for reliability. Meanwhile, Mercedes was launching their new M112 V6 with bulletproof engineering. Audi was pushing their turbocharged 4s, and Japanese competitors were building engines that could run for 300,000 miles without major service. BMW needed a response, and fast. So their engineers went back to the drawing board with one mission: build an inline-six that combined the soul of the M30, the efficiency of modern technology, and the reliability that would win back customer trust. What they created was the M54. The M54 launched in 2000, and on the surface, it looked like an evolution of the M52. Same basic architecture, same displacement options in the engines, such as 2.2-litre, 2.5-litre, and a 3-litre. But BMW had rebuilt almost everything that mattered. Firstly, in terms of the block, they switched from an aluminium block to an iron aluminium composite in some variants, though the 2.5 and 3-litre versions kept the all-aluminium construction. This gave them the strength they needed without the weight penalty. The block itself used what BMW called Alusil technology, aluminium with silicon particles embedded in the cylinder walls. This meant they could skip the traditional iron cylinder liners and go straight aluminium on piston contact. The result? Better heat dissipation, reduced friction, and a lighter overall package. But here's the clever part. BMW designed the block with increased rigidity around the main bearing caps. They knew this engine would need to last, so they over-engineered the foundation. The crankshaft journals were machined to tighter tolerances than the M52. The oil passages were redesigned for better flow at high RPM. The cylinder head was completely redesigned. They kept the double overhead cam setup, but improved the combustion chamber geometry for better fuel efficiency and more power. The valve angles were optimized. The cooling passages were rethought. BMW also upgraded the valve springs and retainers to handle higher RPM more reliably. The camshafts themselves were reground with more aggressive profiles on the intake side, which is part of why the M54 feels more responsive than the M52 in the mid-range. And the intake manifold? Completely new design. BMW ditched the old plastic manifold for a more sophisticated variable length system called DISA, the Differentiated Intake System Actuator. At low RPM, it keeps the intake runners long for better torque. At high RPM, it switches to shorter runners for more top-end power. It's a simple mechanical flap valve, but it transforms how the engine breathes. And here's the big one. They fixed VANOS. The M54 used a simplified, more robust version of the dual VANOS system. Better seals, improved oil passages, stronger solenoids. It wasn't perfect. No VANOS system is, but it was leagues ahead of what came before. See, the M52's VANOS relied on small rubber seals that would degrade from heat cycling and oil contamination. When they failed, you'd get rough idle, loss of power, and that distinctive VANOS rattle that haunted every BMW forum in the early 2000s. The M54's VANOS units used redesigned piston seals with better material compounds. The oil control solenoids were moved to more accessible locations, and BMW tightened up the tolerances in the VANOS gears themselves, which reduced play and improved longevity. Now, VANOS can still fail on an M54, usually around 100,000 to 150,000 miles, if you've been lazy with oil changes. But it's a manageable maintenance item, not a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. BMW also introduced fully electronic throttle control. No more throttle cable. This gave them precise control over engine response and laid the groundwork for their drive-by-wire systems in future models. This was controversial at launch. Enthusiasts hated the idea of removing the mechanical link between their right foot and the throttle plate. But BMW's implementation was good enough that most people forgot they were driving by wire. The response was linear, predictable, and actually improved fuel economy by optimizing throttle opening based on driving conditions. One area where BMW really learned from the M52 was the oil system. The M54 got an improved oil pump with higher flow capacity and a redesigned oil filter housing that was less prone to leaks. The cooling system also saw upgrades, larger coolant passages in the block, a more efficient water pump, and critically, better thermostat placement to reduce the risk of overheating, a problem that plagued some M52 variants. The M54 B30, the 3-litre variant, produced 228 horsepower and 221 pound-feet of torque. Not earth-shattering by today's standards, but back then, it was the perfect balance of performance and refinement. But here's what the numbers don't tell you. The M54 B30 made 90% of its torque from just 2,000 RPM, all the way to 5,500 RPM. That's a 3,500 RPM power band where the engine just pulls. No dips, no flat spots, just linear, predictable thrust. Smooth power delivery. A red line at 6,500 RPM, and that classic BMW inline-six sound that made every tunnel run feel like a symphony.
But the real magic wasn't in the spec sheet. It was in how the engine felt. Throttle response was instant. The torque curve was flat and usable, and it would rev freely, begging you to explore the upper range. The smaller displacement variants, the 2.5-litre M54 B25 and 2.2-litre M54 B22, used the same basic architecture, but with shorter strokes and smaller bores. They gave up some outright power, but gained better fuel economy and even sharper throttle response due to lower rotating mass. This was an engine that made a 330i feel fast, and made a 530i feel refined. It did both jobs perfectly.
The M54 ran from 2000 to 2006, just 6 years of production. In that time, it powered some of BMW's most iconic models. The E46 330i and 330ci, the E39 530i, the E60 525i and 530i, the Z4 3-litre i, as well as the X3 and X5 3-litre i. And here's where things get very interesting. When these cars were new, they were expensive. A 2003 E46 330i cost over $35,000. Most people leased them, returned them, and moved on. But enthusiasts? They saw something different. They saw a naturally aspirated inline-six with no turbo lag, no complex forced induction, and no fragile high-pressure fuel pumps. They saw an engine that could hit 200,000 miles with nothing more than oil changes and the occasional VANOS refresh. And they bought them, in huge numbers. There has been appreciation is value. Today, a clean E46 330i with the M54 can sell for $15,000 to $25,000. Some ZHP models, the performance package versions, are pushing $30,000. That's not just appreciation, that's investment-grade territory for a 20-year-old sedan. And it's not just the E46s. The E39 530i Sport models are climbing. The Z4 3-litre-i Roadsters are holding value. Even the X3 and the X5 variants are becoming desirable for engine swaps. Which brings us to the other way the M54 made people money. Because the M54 is relatively compact, reliable, and makes good power, it became the go-to swap engine for classic BMWs. The E30s, the E28s, the 2002s, and even some E21s. A running M54 B30 with transmission can sell for $2,000 to $4,000 in the used market. A low-mileage unit? $5,000 or more. People are pulling these engines out of wrecked X3s and X5s, rebuilding them and dropping them into classic chassis. And they're making a profit doing it.
So why does the M54 matter?
Because it represents the end of an era. After the M54, BMW went all in on turbocharged engines. The M52 replaced it in 2004 with Valvetronic technology, variable valve lift that eliminated the throttle plate entirely. It was brilliant engineering, but it added complexity. Then came the N20 and N26 Turbo 4s in 2011. Then the B58 Turbo 6 in 2015. All of them are impressive. All of them make more power. The B58, for example, makes 382 horsepower in the M340i. That's 154 more horsepower than the M54 B30. It's faster, more efficient, and, honestly, a technical masterpiece. But here's what it isn't. Simple. The B58 has a twin-scroll turbocharger, direct and port injection, variable valve timing on both cams, an electric water pump, and engine management software so complex it takes specialist tools just to diagnose a misfire. When something goes wrong, and eventually something will, you're looking at dealer-level diagnostics and four-figure repair bills. The M54? You can diagnose most problems with a $20 OBD2 scanner and fix them with hand tools in your driveway. And that matters more than people realize. The M54 came at the perfect moment in automotive history. It had just enough electronics to be efficient and reliable, but not so many that you needed a computer science degree to work on it. You can replace the VANOS solenoids in an afternoon. You can rebuild the cooling system with parts from FCP Euro for under $500. You can even pull the entire engine with basic tools and a cherry picker. Try that with a modern BMW. The N20 Turbo 4, known for timing chain failures that require pulling the engine. The N63 V8, notorious for burning oil and needing $15,000 engine rebuilds. Even the vaunted B58 has high-pressure fuel pump issues that can only be solved with BMW-specific parts. The M54 represents the last generation of BMW engines that regular people could maintain themselves. And in an era where right to repair is being fought in courtrooms and new cars are becoming subscription-based appliances, that's not just nostalgic, it's valuable. But there's something else, something harder to quantify. Modern turbocharged engines make peak torque at 1,500 RPM and hold it flat to redline. On paper, that's perfect, but in reality, it feels artificial. There's no reward for revving them out. No incentive to explore the upper ranges. They're fast, but they're not engaging. Peak power is at 5,900 RPM. If you want to go fast, you need to keep it on the boil. You need to downshift. You need to use the whole rev range. And that creates a connection between driver and machine that turbocharged engines, no matter how fast, can't replicate. It's the same reason people still love naturally aspirated Porsche flat sixes, the same reason Honda S2000 prices keep climbing, the same reason Mazda is one of the only companies still building naturally aspirated sports cars. Linear throttle response, progressive power delivery, a soundtrack that builds with the RPMs. These things matter to enthusiasts, even if they don't show up on a spec sheet. The M54 was the last BMW inline-six you could truly understand. No complex electronics, no high-pressure turbos, no fragile timing chains buried deep in the engine. Just iron, aluminium, and 80 years of BMW engineering distilled into one elegant package. It saved BMW's reputation when they needed it most. It powered their return to form in the early 2000s, and it created a generation of enthusiasts who refused to let these engines die. Walk into any BMW specialist shop today, and you'll see M54s on engine stands, not because they've failed, but because people are rebuilding them, refreshing them, preparing them for another 200,000 miles. You'll find them in E30s that were built in the 1980s, in 2002s from the 1970s, in custom builds that BMW never imagined. The M54 has transcended its original purpose and become something more, a cult engine that represents everything enthusiasts loved about BMW before the company went mass market. That's why mechanics hoard them, that's why prices keep climbing, and that's why, 2 decades later, the M54 is still one of the most important engines BMW ever built. Because it wasn't just good for its time, it was the right engine at the right moment, and it marked the end of an era we'll never get back. It's about the engines that shaped automotive history. Please subscribe. Next time, we're diving into the gearbox that Mercedes never wanted you to know about, and why it's still outlasting modern transmissions to this very day.